Hey guys, KUZO here back in the video. In this video today, we're going to be talking about traditional art versus digital art. Just kidding, there's no point in that because traditional art is dying. What I just said probably got under some people's skin, but let me explain. So if you were to actually look at traditional art versus digital art, and you kind of went down the general pros and cons of both, digital art used to always be on the short end of the stick, but that's somewhat changed in the recent years. So that one is more so opinion based, but when it comes to efficiency and cost, those are pretty much set in stone. You can actually go and look in specific scenarios and say, yes, this is more expensive, and yes, this is more efficient. Well, you might be saying, even if traditional or digital won this little bullet point fight, it doesn't mean the other medium would stop being used widespread. And that seems logical and everything until you look at the two objective bullet points and who they're most important to. And who exactly values cost and efficiency the most? Well, the industry. And the industry is what shapes the direction we head. And some of you might be asking, how does the industry actually shape the direction we go? And the answer is simple, really. If the industry is asking you to do digital work, but you're saying, I'm only going to do traditional work, you would have to be really, really good for them to be like, okay, yes, you can do it traditionally. But some of it, you just can't do it. I mean, the industry is moving towards CGI even, and you can't have traditional CGI. I mean, that's not possible. It's computer generated images. And of course, there can always be traditional parts to the process, like storyboarding and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, once they start going into animation or, going into CGI, you're going to have to move to digital work. Because I don't think there's any like animated TV shows that are colored traditionally anymore. I could be wrong, but it's probably one of those few and far in between things that were done like with a creative vision. So at the end of the day, basically, if the industry is saying we need digital artwork and you want to do traditional and they're not going to take your traditional artwork, that means you're either not going to have a job or you're going to change to digital work. And with the new generation growing up watching all their favorite artists draw digitally, you're going to have more young artists wanting to go straight to digital as soon as possible. And this wasn't really a thing in the past, and it also just wasn't as possible in the past. And just about 20 years ago, I mean, digital art was just too expensive, and it wasn't necessarily widespread enough for artists to specifically seek out digital work to become fully digital artists. And it wasn't required as much in the industry. Simply put, around that time, it was just a little bit too new. But fast forwarding a few years, digital art started to become more widespread. CGI had really become a thing a little bit before that, but it was still very new. But the industry started seeing that you could save money if artists started drawing digitally. And this little in-between stage was where graphic tablets started to become more accessible. And they were still at a pretty high price for what they were, but they weren't so high priced that people couldn't go and get them. And when I say couldn't, I mean it just wasn't worth it unless you were a professional at that time. Or you really knew art was going to be your career, so you put a future investment down into a graphics tablet. And keep in mind, these tablets, these graphic tablets, they were ones where you drew on the tablet and then you had to look at your computer screen. So there was always a little bit of a disconnect, and there was a relearning of the art process a little bit for those. So they were a bit on the pricey side, and then at the same time, they didn't necessarily give you the same feeling as traditional art. But as digital art started to become a bigger part of the industry, what really created the wave was when cheaper alternatives and competition came into the scene. So as all these aspiring artists was seeing like digital art pop up and they kind of wanted to do it too, all of a sudden these competitive companies started popping up with these cheaper tablets that were a lot more accessible to many artists. And at this time, draw-on-screen tablets they were a thing, but they were still very expensive. They're kind of like, you are only getting this if you know this is your living. So with graphics tablets starting to be the entry point for younger artists, it still had a little bit of a disconnect because it just wasn't quite traditional. You had this disconnect of having to look up at the computer screen but draw down below. So it still wasn't as pleasing. And these competitive companies still weren't quite at the level of the more professional companies. But fast forwarding a few years later, these competitive companies started getting a lot better with their products, and their tablets just started getting better at a better price. But at the same time, they still weren't quite at that level of the high-tier competitor, and the price was still a little up there. but at least they're still getting closer to an entry-level price. Also, entry-level is kind of a weird way to put it because there's also 2 more components with this. So there's 3 altogether. You have to get the tablet, you have to get a computer that's at least strong enough to run then the 3rd component, the software. And back then, there really weren't a whole lot of software options. I know there was like Fire Alpaca, Paint Tool Sci, Clip Studio was a thing, and then there's Photoshop. But I mean, you pretty much weren't getting Photoshop unless that was actually part of your job, or once again, you knew you were really serious about becoming an artist or a photo editor. Fast forwarding a few years later, voila, progression happens and tablets are better, computers are better for a lower price, and things start becoming much more entry level. But still, for the draw-on tablets, it still wasn't quite entry-level price because you're looking at like the cheapest is probably like $200 for something at least work. You got probably about $300 to $200 for a computer that will most likely only really run your program for like a good 2.5, 3 years. And then you got the software, which hopefully, doesn't have a subscription service. That's why most people went with Paint Tool Sci or Clip Studio. And the whole reason why I keep on going back to draw-on tablets is because that's literally like the pinnacle of, digital art, because you're always trying to replicate kind of the traditional process, and that's the closest thing to replicating the traditional process, being able to actually draw on the screen. Now, throughout all the progress we had just talked about, we arrive at 2016. And this is the year that came, the thing that no one really saw coming, but would change the landscape for digital art for the years to come. And that thing is the iPad Pro. Apple couldn't have released this thing at a better time. At the time, many people probably didn't see that, but when you look at the tablet prices back then, competitors were just barely getting good enough for that entry-level price. Mixed in with those other bullet points that I talked about with software, computer, and then you have to get the tablet. And just like within Apple fashion, they come out with this thing that's like $800, $700, And then the Apple Pencil's $100 on top of that. So in no way was this base level. When I got this iPad, which by the way, I contracted through Sprint, because Sprint was my carrier and they carried the iPad Pro, that's how I got mine. I was very skeptical at first and I was afraid to kind of make that purchase, but right when I started using it, I knew right away what this meant for digital art in the future. And at that time when I got that first generation iPad Pro, mind you, I had an $800 draw-on screen tablet for my computer. I was lucky enough to be able to get that through one of my first bigger commissions. And right away, when I looked at the difference between the two, I immediately regretted the purchase of that draw-on tablet. I had purchased both of these things right around the same time, and my iPad Pro literally blew this thing out of the water. The screen was on a whole different level. The Apple Pencil was also on a completely different level with pressure sensitivity and no parallax on the screen. I was actually flabbergasted that I spent almost the exact same amount on these two products, and there was such a huge disparity in quality between the two. Not to mention the iPad Pro was its own computer, yet they were both around the same price and the other one still had to be hooked up to something to work. Basically, this iPad comes out and it's not entry level. What it's doing is it's competing with people in that price range of $800, which it still dominated. That was the whole reason why I was able to grow, that and Procreate at that time. That price range is more of a professional range, and it's not like an entry-level range, so the first and second generation iPad kind of sat in this kind of limbo zone, where it was perfect for anyone who wanted to get into art, but it wasn't priced at that level. It was priced at a level for professionals where they didn't really see where this product sat in their workflow. But as each generation progressed, more and more softwares came just like we thought, and even more are coming with even the new generation, which everyone's wondering exactly what the M1's going to do for the iPad Pro for the professionals. But the biggest choice that they made was adding Apple Pencil support to all of their other iPads. And just like that, they closed the gap of entry level for digital artists. Now, people who are aspiring artists, they're always going to start off with, that super low entry point of a paper and pencil. But as the new generation grows up watching all these artists that they admire drawing digitally, they're going to want to draw digitally as soon as possible. And with these cheaper options, they're going to start drawing digitally sooner and sooner and younger and younger. That's how Apple has literally changed the landscape for digital art. Can only imagine how cheap some of these iPads that are already cheap now are going to be in 3 years when you can get them used. And you can already get really good, cheap, used deals as it is. And that is my a little bit exciting take and a somewhat sad take of traditional art dying. But that doesn't mean it's ever going to completely die and completely fade out. And as you guys know, I would never want that to happen. If you even look at my channel remotely, a lot of my content is done traditionally, but all my professional work is done digitally. Traditional work can always have a place, especially even in professional workflows where it's mostly going to be used for rough stages and stuff like that as the future goes on. And even now, a lot of the time, traditional work is mostly used in rough stages and not final product. And as time goes on, it will become more of an aesthetic use case and a novelty factor. And as much as I love traditional artwork, the iPad excites me for what it has for the future and what it can do now, and how it's going to push the industry and the competition to see what they're going to do with everything. But yeah, in any case, if you guys want to help support my artists, help support what I do in this channel, go check me on my Patreon, link in the description. But I'd like to take this time to give a big thanks to all my patrons. You guys are awesome and help me be able to do what I do in this channel. And a special thanks to my tuning and joning tier patrons. You guys are awesome. In any case, if you guys like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you're new to this channel, like what you see, please subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notified when each video comes out. And like always, guys, hope you're having a great day or night wherever you live. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.